Welcome back to another interview on the Agape Investing channel. Today I talk with entrepreneur and leadership coach Kieran Lenahan of Lenahan Coaching. Kieran works with leaders, startup founders, and entrepreneurs to increase their self-awareness, improve decision-making, and overcome the mindset hurdles that slow them down or hold them back while maintaining their personal health. Kieran lives out in New Jersey. He's a husband, a foster dad, and a lifelong athlete who loves to play basketball, soccer, and golf. Kieran and I are going to be talking all about habits, how to form good habits, how to break old bad habits, and overall just how to be more productive and successful within our businesses and personal lives. He shares a lot of really practical tips, so get ready to take a lot of notes. And with that, we'll get to the interview.
All right.
Hey, Kieran, welcome to the Agape Investing channel.
Thank you so much for having me, Katie. It's exciting to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yes, I know. We met a little bit ago, I think just on Instagram, if I remember right, and we connected, and it was so cool to hear your story, so I wanted to share it here. And if you want to start out maybe by sharing like an interesting fact about yourself.
Interesting facts that I'd say is relatively unique. My wife and I are foster parents, so we have a 9.5-month-old foster son who's been with us since he's 3.5 weeks old.
That's so fun. And I think I remember your wife is also pregnant, right?
She is, yeah. So we're about 70 days away from due date. So
Oh my gosh.
we'll probably be looking at 2 under the age of 1, which will be a fun
Oh,
adventure.
wow. Both under the age of 1. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure that will be a huge blessing, but also a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. I'm enjoying my sleep while I have it, but
Oh
looking
yeah,
forward to it
definitely.
for sure.
So you're a leadership coach for Christian entrepreneurs. So I thought maybe if you wanted to kind of explain to everyone what that means and maybe what you do and how you help Christian entrepreneurs.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like Katie said, I work with Christian entrepreneurs specifically. Leadership coaching, business coaching, like these are all words that describe the same thing about what I do. So, what I do is work with people in a one-on-one setting to help them grow their business without growing their stress and anxiety and the number of hours that they have to work. And so doing this from a biblical perspective and helping them really form the habits in their personal life and their business that are going to lead to the results that they want. So that spans realistically anywhere from helping people develop discipline in their spiritual relationship with God, all the way to what are the habits and activities that are going to help people grow their businesses that they can do day in and day out, instead of in both areas just relying on willpower, like motivation that comes and goes, instead of that, really establishing processes that are repeatable and that become automatic.
Yes, I do find that, as I read a ton of different like business and entrepreneurship books, that seems to almost be like the key piece to success within a business is figuring out how you can make something a habit versus just getting that willpower. And I know for myself too, if I have something that's more repetitive, kind of like in my systems and stuff, I tend to do it more than just like being like, oh, I don't feel like doing this today, or I feel like now I all of a sudden get this inspiration. And I think I still have those days, but it works a lot better when I have something created more as a system. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about that? How, like, where we find habits maybe in the Bible, or, how that kind of aligns with our faith in order to, build these habits.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much fun stuff to talk about when it comes to habits and how it applies to our faith, both from like, where does it actually come from? Where do we see it in the Bible? But then also, how do we use habits to strengthen our faith and our relationship with God? So I guess to start off really briefly, if we go and look at Jesus, right? He's the guy, he's the one that we should always look to. And we look at the rhythms and kind of the habits of his life. And he wasn't doing all of these things that are super like popular today, of like wake up, go for a 10-mile run and do a crazy workout. Like, we don't know what his workout routine was, but
And
we
Jesus
do
worked out.
see he was, based on all of the movies and shows about him, he's a pretty fit guy.
He's
Yeah,
always
I would
so
imagine.
strong.
I know. I guess he was a carpenter. There's probably some physical labor
Yes.
involved in that. But, one of the main habits that we see with Jesus, basically from the beginning of his ministry, is spending time in what's called the quiet place, or just in solitude and silence. And so we see him often withdraw. I think it's in every single one of the gospels, where he will have a full day of ministry and of activities. Like, he was a really busy guy. He, like, when he started his ministry, his life was not dissimilar from a famous person, in that people were always kind of flocking to him, asking him questions and wanting
Yeah.
to be around him. And so between like days full of that and the next day, you would always find him withdrawing to pray, to spend time with God, and to just be in solitude and in silence. And so for me, that's one of the core habits, the core places that I see habits in the Bible. And there are a few other verses that I think don't use the word specifically habits, but
Mm-hmm.
they point to that concept. So I think Romans chapter 12, where it talks about being transformed by the renewing of our minds. And then uh, even in Philippians, where it talks about doing all things without grumbling and complaining. There are parts of the Bible and uh, suggestions and things from the Bible that we should be doing, that when we boil things down, we have a habit of doing maybe the opposite. So like
Yes.
complaining and grumbling, for instance,
Ah,
that can be such a common habit for me. Like, personally, I know that it's something I've continued to work on. But these things, these patterns in our thoughts, which I would argue are the deepest form of a habit. Like, there's external behaviors, but then there's also the thoughts that we have in our
mhm.
head. And so, renewing our minds is about transforming and changing our thought patterns and the habits of where our mind goes when we experience different things out in the world. So those are a few places where I'd say I see habits, both in the person of Jesus and then also in some of the other commands or suggestions from people like Paul and others.
Yeah, definitely. So, so obviously habits are super important, especially for entrepreneurs who are looking to have, success within their businesses, to have a profitable, well-oiled machine. Um, so what kind of recommendations can you give maybe a new entrepreneur, or maybe someone who has been working in their own business for a while? How can they form these habits so that they can be more productive in their work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually a pretty frequent question that I get. And it's interesting because
Yes.
I always will first give out a cop-out answer, and then I'll actually answer the question. So the cop-out answer is that it depends. It always depends on the individual person. So the luxury I have of working one-on-one with people is really being able to tailor and customize our plans and like how we
Yeah.
work based on their unique position. So that's the cop-out answer. It depends. The real answer is, in terms of getting started, before we set goals, before we set a vision of all these amazing things that people are going to accomplish in their
Mm,
business, we get to the root. And I think Christianity and being followers of Jesus, I think this should resonate with us more so
yeah.
than anybody else, is that before we talk about external behaviors, we first have to get down to the root of our identity
Mm-hmm.
and think about habits from that perspective. Because I'll speak for myself personally. I used to go straight to, these are the goals that I want to hit. These are the goals I want to hit personally and in my business. Now, how do I go and plan and make that happen? But I skipped the really important step, the most important step, and the step that I force all of my clients to start with, which is to simply answer the question, who is the person that you want to become? And so it's less about what you want to do or what you want to achieve, and more about who you want to be. And I think
Yeah.
for Christ followers, especially, the maybe Sunday school answer is, I want to be like Jesus, but we can get more specific than that and really drill down into, well, what does that mean? And I talk about that from kind of three different perspectives. So who do you want to be as a Jesus follower? Like,
Mm.
describe that person. What are the characteristics? What are the markers of like the kind of Jesus follower that you want to be? who do you want to be as an entrepreneur? So in your business, and then who do you want to be in some personal aspect of your life, whether it's as a husband, a wife, a father, a brother, whatever that maybe familial or personal piece of your identity is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's just first start out by describing what does that look like for you? Because if we don't start there, getting straight to the behaviors and not realizing like what the foundation is and what the core is, it's like in Jesus's parable, it's like building a house on sand as opposed to building it on
Yeah.
solid rock. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love this. And I you mentioned goals. You mentioned goals. So I know a lot of us, especially at the beginning of the year, or maybe, right now it's the fall time and a lot of people are starting school again. And the fall time seems to be another kind of restarting point to where we set goals for ourselves. And so how can we, in our businesses, or even as, just in our personal lives, how can we set goals, or how can we, I guess, backtrack and set up habits to achieve those goals? Because I think a lot of us tend to start with those goals and to figure out, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. This is the level of success that I would love to achieve. But how can we backtrack that and then implement these habits that you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Because that's what I do want to emphasize the point. Goals are not bad. Goals, I'm not saying like we shouldn't set goals. Goals can be really, really helpful. But if we do focus all of our attention on the goals without actually thinking about the identity that is at the core and at the foundation of it, we're going to have a lot of trouble sticking to those goals and
Yeah.
achieving them and sticking to the habits that would actually lead to it. So the way that I like to think about it is, and what's really nice is you can back in. So if you have a goal, great, don't throw it away. Let's actually use that to then back in to figure out, well, what are the habits you'll need to form to achieve them? And then even one layer deeper, who is the kind of person that you need to become in order to achieve those goals? So a really specific example. So a client of mine, she wants to reach $100,000 in revenue this year in her business.
Nice.
Right. So that was her goal from the beginning of the year. And that's where she was starting out. But we needed to get a little bit deeper. So we started to talk about, well, what are the types of things that you think you'll need to do in order to make that happen? So we talked about that. Making sales calls, doing different marketing activities and things like that. And then if you bring that a level deeper, well, who do you need to become? Like, what characteristics do you need to have in order to achieve those goals? So if you were to imagine in the future, say 3 years down the road, and you are already achieving those results, what are the characteristics about you and that future version of you that are creating those results? And so it's an interesting thought exercise. So you kind of go to that future where you're already doing it, and then you come back to the present and like, okay, well, I think realistically, it probably means I need to be showing up consistently in my marketing. I need to be really confident in the value that I bring to the table and what I do. And so like, great, you need to be confident, reliable, and consistent. So like those are 3 things that relate to who you need to be. So now we can actually talk about, all right, let's start planning on what does that look like for you? Where do you need to be consistent, confident, and reliable in your business? And then from there, like that's step 1, define who you want to be. Step 2 is to actually start showing yourself evidence that you are that person. So now you try to do things that demonstrate to yourself and prove to yourself that you are reliable, that you are confident because you do know what you're talking about. And so that's how you can kind of at a high level walk from goals to habits all the way down to the identity underneath.
I really like that, starting with kind of this identity aspect, because I think that it's honestly really biblical, because like you had said in the beginning of, who do I want to be? Like what kind of characteristics do I want to take on? And a lot of those things we can find throughout the Bible of the kind of person that we want to be, as far as when it comes to relationships or entrepreneurship within our businesses, things like that. And I'd love to know kind of like what you do, and maybe some of the processes that you take with your clients in order to kind of dive deeper for someone to figure those things out within their own businesses and personal lives?
Yeah. So do you mean like what exercise or what conversations would we have to dig into the identity piece or
Yeah,
into,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So we spend like we will at least spend the first session, which is the longest session. I spend 2 hours with people, and we have it's a long time to be on Zoom, but we do take a break. We make sure we stand up and stretch, but we'll spend 2 hours just living in that future kind of that future world, and just think of all of the things that you feel like you will want to do or that will need to happen to create those results. And so realistically, I bombard people with tons of questions about who they need to be, what they need to be doing. And then from there, you start to realize we have a lot of beliefs, like talking about renewing our minds. We have a lot of beliefs that limit us. We have a lot of doubts and fears that
Mm-hmm.
prevent us from actually doing the things that we know we should do.
Mm-hmm.
And so once those start to come up to the surface, once you realize, okay, this is my goal, this is what I need to do, and then all of a sudden the fear and the doubt starts to creep in and say, ooh, I don't know, what if you fail?
Oh,
I
oh,
don't know if you should go after that, right? Because then you're going to feel terrible, and then everyone's going to think you're a huge failure, and you're going to feel worthless, right? So like
mhm.
all of these ideas, and we would say that's the enemy trying to attack you and
Yeah.
prevent you from actually doing the things that God has given you the talents to do, given you the desire to do.
Mhm.
So that's kind of maybe the two-stage process. So get into the identity and the habits, but then from there we start to see, well, what are the obstacles that have prevented you from achieving those things already?
Mhm.
Because oftentimes we have goals that we've probably had for a while, but for some reason we're not getting there. So like, what are
Mm.
the things that are actually preventing you from doing that? And so we spend time discussing that, because once we can understand those and become aware of them, then we can start to renew our mind. We can start to change our thought
Yeah.
patterns from there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I'd like to go back to habits. So we'll go through like a hypothetical situation. I have the goal to, you know, transform the lives of 100 people by, helping them with their money. So basically, I want to reach 100 customers. Um, what habits, I guess, I kind of know the habits I want to form, but how do I form those habits now? Like, how can I actually make something practically into a system or a habit within my own business?
Yeah. So again, great question. And there's a few different ways we can approach it, but they're all certainly related. So there are just true kind of laws of how habits work, and there
Mm.
are ways that we can really stack the deck in our favor
Yeah.
in order to make it easier for ourselves to form that habit. So if you already have an idea of the habits that you do want to form,
Mm-hmm.
we can kind of talk about, uh, all right, where and when do you want to do them? Because let me talk about the four parts or the four stages
Yeah.
of a habit. So first there's a cue. So there's always a cue.
Mm-hmm.
After the cue comes a craving,
Mm.
then a response, and then a reward. So those are the four steps that every habit and really every behavior that we do goes through those four stages, like continuously. It never stops. And I can't take credit for like these stages. This is from a book by James Clear called Atomic Habits. I highly recommend that book.
Yes, fantastic book.
It's incredible. So cue, craving, response, and reward. And so at each of those kind of stages, there are a few different tactics that you can use. So for example, like so if you want to reach 100 people and help them with their finances, what's an example of maybe a habit that you want to form?
So probably, getting in front of the right people. So, um, whether it's like starting a conversation or, maybe even reaching them, via social media. That'd probably be like somewhere in the beginning steps, I guess, is getting in front of people.
Right. Okay. So let's take maybe sharing about what you're doing on social media, right? That's probably letting people know what you're doing is
Mm-hmm.
probably something you want to do on an ongoing basis, right? To continue
Yeah.
to raise awareness and so that people are aware of it. So if you want to create a good habit, there are four ways. If you are able to do all these things, you will make it like way easier than you could have ever imagined. And then we can also later, if you want, we can talk about how do you break a bad habit. And really it's actually the
Yeah.
inverse and the opposite of these four strategies. So um, the first one would be make it obvious. So you want to make the cue for when you are going to post on social media obvious. So what for you when you post on social media, what's like your cue to do that? Or could you think of a cue that would kind of give you the reminder or put you in that mode of like, okay, now is the time for me to do this?
Probably when I go on social media, I hop on there and maybe see someone else's really awesome content or tips. And I'm like, I should post something. Or maybe even when I like come up with, or I hear a quote or something and I'm like, oh, I should share this or share this new piece of knowledge. That usually triggers me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's certainly one. So when we talk about like that first stage of a cue, there are multiple cues. One is the time of day. One is the environment that we're in. Those are usually very common ones that are kind of always present. We're always in a location and we're
Mm-hmm.
always in we're in time. I guess I don't know how else you would say that, but so those are some cues. And so going on social media and seeing other people's posts, that could be a cue. If you wanted to maybe have a little bit more control over, see over when you wanted to do it
When, mm-hmm.
and the consistency, you might want to attach it to a different cue. So one really helpful
Mm,
strategy is it's called habit stacking. I'm not sure
yeah.
if you remember it from the book, but basically, if there's a habit that you already do every day and it matches the frequency of the habit that you want to form. So say you wanted to post on social media every day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's another habit that you have every day?
I sit down at my desk.
Boom, you sit down at your desk.
Boom.
So you can literally say, when I sit down at my desk, I will create a social media post. And
Mm,
that's so now every day you're going to have that cue. And then
yes.
once you write that social media post, that's your response. And
Mm.
then after that, so that'll be you'll have the craving to write it, and then you'll have the response of actually writing it. And then how will you feel after you've written that social media post as soon as you sat at your desk?
Great. I'll
Right.
I'll feel like I accomplished something.
Right. Before you've done anything else, right? You've sat down at your desk ready to get started, and you've already knocked out something that is a habit that's really important for your business and your mission of serving people with their finances. And so the cool thing is like, all right, so that seems simple enough. But now the reward for that, like that feeling that you get of feeling proud and accomplished, like that early
Mhm.
on in the day, that's going to be kind of a self-fueling cycle. So now once you do that a few times and you show yourself that evidence that, oh, I'm consistent with this, you start to just get into that rhythm. And our brain, the way that our brains work is that they don't want to work hard. Our brains don't want to
Mhm.
work hard. So anytime we know it,
Truth.
like if we know a cue and we know what the anticipated reward is going to be,
Mhm.
the brain's like, great, I'm in the groove. You don't even have to consciously think about it. Once it becomes a habit, it's essentially automatic. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, now that you've kind of paired up, sitting at your desk with creating the post, your body's going to recognize that pattern, and your brain is just going to get into it. So once you build some momentum with small wins, like celebrate, reward yourself even more. Be like, yeah,
Yeah.
high five yourself. I don't know, do something.
Yes, I did it.
Yeah, because the reward has to do with like scientifically with dopamine in our body. Like it enjoys the
Yes.
reward. And so next time you sit at your desk, the dopamine will actually, instead of being after you write the post, you're actually going to get it as soon as you sit at the desk, because it's already
Oh,
anticipating
that
the
anticipation.
reward. Yeah. So it's like your body is already like expecting it and excited for it. So
It's
it's,
ready.
yeah, it's like that's an example of kind of walking through that process. And there are a few other ways to design
Mm-hmm.
a habit, but that's kind of an example. So making that cue obvious, right? You sit at your desk, you always sit at your desk.
Yeah.
Um, the other three kind of ways to stack the deck in your favor are to make it attractive,
Mm-hmm.
make it easy, and make it satisfying. So if you're able to do those things and like make it easy, obvious, attractive, and satisfying, you're going to be able to pretty consistently stick to that habit and form it.
Definitely. And I can see how those things play into my life, making it easy and attractive and things like that. I can see how that plays out in just like my daily habits that I have. Simply like I get up and like I always have this craving to work out because it's like I've kind of like consistently made that habit of like, wanting to do that. And it's attractive to me because there's people around me who also enforce this concept of like, a healthy lifestyle and things like that. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. If anyone's listening to this, I'm sure they're going through like thinking like, oh yeah, that's why I do this every day. And that's why,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
have this anticipation build up and like I have this sense of accomplishment. I take daily vitamins too. And one way that like sometimes I forget, but I make it easy for myself by like putting them on my counter every
Mm-hmm.
night. So that way, like right when I wake up in the morning, it's like right there. It's super
Right.
easy. Like I don't
That's
have
the
to think
cue. Yeah.
about like doing it. And so, yeah, I can see how like all of these things kind of build together and come together perfectly to create these habits. Okay, so now I know you mentioned it, and I'm sure I'm thinking it, and a lot of other people I'm sure are also thinking it. All of us have terrible habits that we tend to apply into our lives. For example, a lot of times instead of like when I sit down at my desk, instead of going straight to working, I tend to hop on like social media for the opposite reason of, posting on my business accounts,
Mm-hmm.
but rather I jump on and check my personal stuff and scroll through that. Or, whatever the bad habit is. I'm sure everyone right now is thinking of their bad habits, but how can we now reverse that and take out those bad habits that are keeping us from accomplishing the goals in our business that we want to, achieve?
Yeah. This is it's $1 million question, and it's
Totally,
something like
totally.
no matter, even the guy who wrote this book about habits, like he even struggled with bad habits that he wanted to eliminate. And so it's
Yes.
completely normal. If you have a bad habit, it's normal. It's okay. Nothing's wrong with you. But
I'm
there
sure
are ways
we
that,
all have them.
yeah, there are ways that you can work them out of your life and make room for a habit that will make you a better business person, will make you more like Jesus, will make you a better dad, a husband, wife, you name it.
Yeah.
So I'll first go back to the idea of identity first. And again, grounding like the bad habit. So one of the coolest examples I think that comes in the book that he talks about is the example of two people who are standing outside of a bar, and somebody else, a third person, walks out and offers them both a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
One person says, no, thank you, I'm trying to quit. The other person says, no, thanks, I'm not a smoker. The
Mm.
two people actually both have a history of smoking, but which one of those two is more likely to actually not or is more likely to not smoke cigarettes over the long haul? It's going to be that second person who said, no,
Yeah.
thanks, I'm not a smoker. Because in their head, they've made this slight tweak of how they see themselves and how they define themselves. And now they've detached that smoker from their identity. Whereas many times, like with a bad habit, we associate that habit with us and our identity, and we think it's
Yeah.
unchangeable. We hold on to it. So again, some other like sillier examples, maybe. So I used to say this all the time. Oh, I'm terrible with names. I'm so sorry. And
Yes.
all I would do is reinforce that idea that I'm terrible with names. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What's going to happen when I say that? I'm going to forget
Yeah.
people's names. And so this idea of, again, what we hold on to as our identity has a really, really strong impact on the habits that stick with us.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. The one that came into my mind when you said that is math. I always tell myself I'm terrible at math, and my husband is really good at math, and so I'm always like, oh no, he's the one that does all the math because he's good at it, and so I don't have to, you know, do all the simple mental math. And so, you know, we play a lot of board games, and he always does the adding of all of the points at the end because I'm bad at math, and so.
Yeah. Yeah. So if anyone listening out there, like you'll catch yourself saying things like that, or maybe thinking things, just next time it happens, just at least like raise a red flag in your head and be like, huh, what would happen if I detach that from like my identity, right? Because
Yeah.
we're human beings, we can learn, we can change. Nothing is set in stone. And as believers, right, we are not like the sin that we're born with, the sins that we have, and our flaws, like that doesn't define us. We have, above anybody else, we have the best reason to understand that our identity is in Jesus, and
Yeah.
he has given us a new identity so that we can get rid of the old one. And so
Mhm.
I think, again, it's just such a powerful parallel between following Jesus and uh, understanding this idea of how identity can hold us back if we let it.
Definitely.
So I'll use a personal example for myself
Yeah.
of a bad habit, and then ways that I've helped it. So for me, I'm a millennial. Grew
Mhm.
up, for the most part, I did have flip phones, but then pretty much grew up with technology all around me. So cell
Yes.
phone is, for the longest time, was just constantly attached to my hip, always on me, would check it
Mhm.
constantly. Actually wrote an article about my like kind of obsession with always being stimulated and busy, and
Yeah.
a phone and phone screens and computer screens were a huge part of the issue. And I found like I couldn't think deeply about things. I would get distracted when praying. My mind was constantly bouncing from thing to thing. I couldn't
Yeah.
focus on one thing at once. So for me, I'll just use the example of being on my phone too frequently. We know this leads to, personally and business wise, to things that are not productive, right? I'm
Yes, amen.
trying to listen to my wife and be on my phone at the same time, because that's totally a thing. Not we can't multitask. It's our attention can't be divided. So it led to just a bunch of like frictions and wasted time when it came to my business. So for me, like to take the inverse of those four kind of ideas that we just talked about, the opposite would be to make the cue invisible. So whatever your cue is for the bad habit,
Mm.
somehow try to eliminate it from your environment. So for me, what does that look like? For example, I used to check my phone for the last 15 minutes before I went to sleep.
Mm.
So now what I do, the cue is my phone is right next to me. And so I just roll over and grab it, and then I would start scrolling. So
Yeah.
now I either put my phone in a drawer next to me, but it's
Oh.
closed. So it's not like I can't just grab it, or I put it across the room. And so I'm making the cue invisible, or at least harder to reach.
Mhm.
Um, so make it unattractive. So for me, part of this was just understanding some of the science of like how bad it is to look at screens close to bedtime, and the impact on sleep.
True.
Sleep impacts so much of our body's functions, which then impacts how productive, how clearly we think throughout the day, our energy
Mm.
levels. All of that affects our businesses and how we show up. So understanding and educating myself with that made the idea of checking my phone before bed really unattractive.
Yeah.
Um, and then the next two, make it difficult, and then make it unsatisfying. So another way, so apps that I used to spend too much time on for no reason, like Twitter,
Mm.
I deleted it. The queue is now gone. I'm not even tempted by it anymore because I don't even see it on my phone. So I don't go to it. And then again, the last one, make it unsatisfying. So along the similar lines. But
Mm.
the point I'll highlight about bad habits is our environment plays such a big role, that
Yes.
if we can eliminate just the temptation from our environment, that's going to be the most effective way to get rid of a bad habit. Because if we're relying on our willpower
Mm.
time and time again over the course of time, it's not a sustainable way to form a habit. So another example would be watching Netflix in bed, right? If you watch too much TV, again, screens before bedtime impacts your sleep. If you want to stop that, move the TV outside of the bedroom or move the laptop outside of the bedroom.
Yeah.
You make it really inconvenient to do. The cue isn't there. And so again, like the environment is the easiest way. Like if you don't want to use your willpower because it's not effective anyway,
Hmm.
eliminate the need to use it at all. Like use your willpower to design the habit and to design your room so that you're not tempted by it. So that's, for me, that's the most impactful thing when it comes to bad habits.
Wow. This is so interesting. Obviously we're talking a lot about like our businesses, and our personal lives and things. I'm also thinking about like our spiritual lives right now,
Hmm.
and like how these like 4 steps to a good habit, or, eliminating bad habits, how we can apply these to eliminating sin within our lives, or even just
Hmm.
like spiritual disciplines on the other hand, like, seeing these on both ends on, how can we apply these into our spiritual lives? It's really kind of fascinating. One way that, a habit that I struggle with myself is, consistently reading the Bible. And, I'm thinking about, I read a lot of books. So, you'd think I would be really good at reading my Bible. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And I think about like, what is it that makes me read my books so often? And a lot of times I leave a book that I'm reading, like just in the middle of a table, and I see it and I'm like, oh, I want to go read that book now. And I like have that anticipation. I have the desire.
Hmm.
It's super easy. It's right
Yeah.
there. And so I'm like, wow, I should really, do this with my own spiritual disciplines and making this simple and easy. We have like a thing on our refrigerator that talks about the things that we should pray about for that day of the week. We kind of
Hmm.
like go through different things, whether it's like for family or for our world or for, whatever it is. Um, and like that's usually a really good trigger, because we open our refrigerator every day, we see it. And so we usually try to remember to do that like right around dinner time. And it's like, just these like simple things where I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I can see how these things apply now to our own spiritual disciplines and eliminating sin from our lives. And
Yeah.
man, there's just so much to say about habits and these triggers, these kind of like steps to building them. Um, I think it's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, it's, for me, habits, there are a few topics that I think are really just foundational to everything that we do. Habits would be one
Mm.
of those because, research scientists have shown it's kind of a range anywhere from like 40 to upwards of 70% of the things that we do are habits. We don't realize it. Like, 'cause
Yeah.
so much is happening outside of just like our conscious minds. Like I put on the same shoe every morning before I go for a run. I never thought about that. I
Yeah.
don't intentionally say I'm putting on my left shoe, then I'm going to put on my right shoe. Like there are many things we do
Oh.
throughout the day that are like that are habitual, but we're not thinking about it again because our brains don't want to exert effort. But yeah, on the topic of spiritual discipline, so that's probably, when it comes to spiritual disciplines, the most common thing that my clients and just like me, my wife, like people in my life have shared is I'm just not consistent with reading my Bible. And so if
Yeah.
you start to apply some of these things, for me, habit stacking was really effective, for establishing just like, again, reading the Bible consistently
Yeah.
and also making it easy. So a few ways that I try to do that for myself. One, after I drop my foster son off at my in-laws and I come back home, part of like a habit that I had already established is just spending 5 to 7 minutes in complete silence, like sitting still,
Mm.
um, and doing a combination of like breathing, gratitude, and just kind of
Yeah.
like being present to the moment. Right after that, I read the Bible. And so I do that thing every morning. I read the Bible every morning, and then I add it on to reading the Bible, journaling. And so you can start to stack them on top of each other once they've become habits. The make it easy portion of it was, all right, I'm just reading a chapter, or I'm reading for 5 minutes a day. Like
Yeah.
starting really small. I think we have this idea we have to go big or go
Go
home,
big.
right? I have to read an entire book of the Bible today.
Mm.
Start small, and again, get it into the routine, and then it becomes way easier to build on that. And instead of reading for 5 minutes, I'm going to start reading for 10 minutes. And it's so much easier to do that as opposed to I'm going to read for an hour every morning. And I've applied this to working out too. I used to do it once or twice a week, and
Yes.
now I'm up to 5 days a week, but it wasn't an overnight process.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time. So yeah. And then again, going back to identity, like if we think about, well, what kind of Jesus followers do we want to be? Like, I want to be one that spends consistent time with God, because that's my source. Like, that's where I get my foundation for everything else. So, I want to do that. It's not like, oh, I should do this. Like, I feel guilty for not doing it. It's like, no, I want to do this because of the person that I want to be. Yeah.
Man, I think that identity thing, that is what really hits me hard. It's just thinking about like, who do I want to be? Obviously I want to be a faithful follower of Christ. What does that look like then to be that person? And then, applying that now to my business, like what kind of business person, what kind of entrepreneur do I want to be? And what does that person look like? And how can I then do that in my own business? Okay. So Kieran, this conversation honestly has been just so jam-packed with so many practical tips. And I know now people are like, okay, I need to go and do all these things. I need to apply all these habits. So to kind of like finish, or, to walk us out tonight or today, whenever we're talking right now, where can people connect with you? Like if they're wanting to, hire you as their coach for their own businesses, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the two best places I'd say to connect with me, one on Instagram, it's Kieran Lenahan Coaching. We can put a link in the description. And then in terms of working with me, you can go to my website, which is lenahancoaching.com. But one, I will say, if you are listening to this and you want just a consult, one to see and actually talk about some of the things that we've talked about today, we can talk about, all right, here's what we can do to actually give you a game plan to move forward. And that would just be a free consult. And then from there, we can decide if we feel like we're a good fit to work together, then we can go from there. So connect with me on Instagram. I post there every business day. That's my habit that I've recently formed. And then, if you reach out through my website, you can contact me there, or you can set up a session for us to talk, and we can go from there.
Yes. And I will let everyone know, I love all the content you post on your Instagram. It's like every single little thing that you post, I'm like, oh, I need to repost this right now and share it with everyone. So I highly recommend, for anyone who just like loves to see those kind of inspirational posts and videos even, Kieran definitely has a lot of really awesome stuff. And I'll make sure to link to all of it on the show notes so that people can they'll make it really easy for them to connect with you. But yeah, today has been really awesome. And thank you so much for jumping on this video here with me today.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I actually forgot one thing. I need to stop forgetting this. I also have a podcast, if you wanted to check it out. It's called the Christian Crossroad Podcast, and it's very similar. It's about the crossroads and the intersection of entrepreneurship and following Jesus. So feel free to go and take a listen to some episodes. And if you're a Christian entrepreneur and you're actually interested in being on the show, again, connect with me through the website or through Instagram, and we can talk about that.
Yes, I'm so glad you remembered that. I meant to mention it myself, so I'm glad that you also remembered. Great podcast, and I'll make sure to also link to that so people can check it out.
Awesome. This has been fun. This is stuff that I love talking about all day, every day. So
me too.
And I do talk about it all day, every day.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to continuing to stay connected and to the community that you're building, because I love what you're doing, and there's a big need for it. I'm excited for some of the things coming up for you.
Cool. Thanks, Kieran. I really appreciate it. Hey, thanks so much for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. That way I know that you're enjoying the content I'm putting out, and we'll create more just like it. If you have any suggestions, feel free to reach out. See you soon.